Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our second CFR training webinar session for the 2021 fiscal year consolidated fiscal report. Yesterday, we had a good session. That recording will be posted shortly, along with today's session on YouTube. We will be sending an email out to all providers, notifying them of when they are available and where they can be found. Today, we have approximately 500 attendees. We're a little short right now, so people will be trickling in. But hopefully today's session goes just as well as yesterday's. We actually had a little bit of a power outage at the main office, but luckily we're all back up and going, so we're good to go. My name is Ken Glenmeyer. I work for OPWDD, and I am the host for today's webinar. Today's panelists will be as follows. Representing OASIS is Paul Green and Paul Sutton. Representing OMH is Ann Hoffman, Michelle Chilinsky, and Kathy Katz. Representing OPWDD is Francis Vasilio and Alpa Amin and myself. Representing SED is Jahida Bentar, and representing the Department of Health is Jeffrey Nickerson. We also have a survey that'll pop up at the end of the event, and we would greatly appreciate you guys taking the time to fill out the survey so that we can continue to make these trainings better. Session 2, which is today's session, will cover general and agency-specific changes and highlights, steps to a successful submission, the COVID-19 and COVID-19S schedules, and claims reporting, DMH2 and DMH3. So once again, this is important. We are allowing questions and answers through WebEx. We strongly encourage you guys to ask questions through the Q&A function in the webinar. It's on your right-hand side, and you might have to click on the arrow next to the Q&A to open up the dialog box. If you don't see it, you might have to click the 3 dots at the bottom of the WebEx and then click Q&A. We will not be answering any questions today, but we plan on answering all the questions and posting those answers online, along with a recording of the webinar so that everyone can get the benefit of the webinar and the questions asked. This is always good to know. The CFR contact information. This slide shows how to contact each agency. Once again, some of us are working remotely, some of us are in office, so the best way to contact everyone is through email. Generally, we have more than one person checking emails, so we should get a quick response if you send an email. Also, New York State Office of Children and Family Services providers may submit questions regarding their CFR submission to the OMH CFR unit. Any claims questions can go to the following. As noted in the previous slide, email would probably be the best method to contact any claims. By the end of the seminar, we hope to accomplish the following goals. Provide New York State agency contact information for specific questions not covered during this training session. We'd like to identify any major changes that have occurred since the release of the July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020 CFR manual. We want to discuss important policies, principles, and rules regarding completion of the CFR via the New York State CFRS software. We want to provide guidance regarding the completion of the COVID-19 and COVID-19S informational schedules. We also want to help providers become more familiar with the claiming and supplemental schedules. I will now pass on the presenting to our first panelist for today's session.
Good morning. I'm Ann Hoffman from the Office of Mental Health. I'll be covering CFR highlights, supplementals, and changes. Any changes from the previous CFR manual will be detailed in the 2020-2021 transmittal letter. It is important to be mindful of the changes listed in the transmittal letter when completing the CFR. Changes in funding source codes or program codes may require immediate corrections when carrying data forward from a prior version of the CFR software to the current version of the CFR software. Executive Order 38. Providers should note that the methodology used to calculate the agency administration allocation for EO 38 is different than the methodology used to calculate the CFR ratio value. EO 38 methodology must be used to determine EO 38 compliance. Top 10 internal controls to prevent and detect fraud. A KPMG fraud survey found that organizations are reporting more experiences of fraud than in prior years, and that 3 out of 4 organizations have uncovered fraud. The New York State Office of Mental Health Bureau of Audit has provided the following list of internal controls to assist you in preventing and detecting fraud at your agency. The first 5 internal controls: separation of duties, monthly reconciliations, credit card access restrictions, providing the Board of Directors oversight of agency operations and management, and written policies and procedures. The second 5 internal controls: ensure agency assets are used only for official business, protect cash, check collections, and all cash funds, protect checks against fraudulent use, avoid or discourage related party transactions. Detailed information can be found on the OMH website at the link provided. Recorded webinars. Previous recorded webinars are available at the YouTube addresses listed. The recording of the current CFR training presentation will be added to the OPWDD YouTube page on a date to be determined. Questions and answers. Written responses to questions and answers from previous CFR training presentations are available at the address listed. The written response to the questions and answers from the current CFR training presentation will be added to the OMH website at a date to be determined. Importing, formatting a text file. Importing, formatting a text file is a time-saving method of populating the CFR directly from spreadsheets. Text files include CFR 1, Expenses and Revenue, CFR 4, Employee Personal Services, CFR 4A, Contracted Personal Services, CBR 4, Claims Personal Services, DMH 2, Claims Program Summary, DMH 3, Claims Funding Source Summary, OPWDD 4, Fringe Benefits and Program Administration, and worksheet details. Refer to the Help menu in the CFR software for guidance on formatting a text file. Changes to frequently asked questions. Section 8, regarding the proper reporting of bad debt. CFR 1, line 40, and adjusted out as non-allowable on line 66. CFR 2, column 9, line 4, and adjusted out as non-allowable on line 8. CFR 3, line 17, and adjusted out as non-allowable on line 41. DMH 1, line 9, and adjusted out as non-allowable on line 13. DMH 2, line 8, and adjusted out as non-allowable on line 12. Okay. Section 8, regarding the Paycheck Protection Program PPP loan forgiveness. The amount of the loan forgiveness of the PPP is reported on the CFR in the revenue section. The amount of the loan forgiveness of the PPP should be reported on the CFR in the program or programs in which the PPP loan was reported as being used for eligible expenses. This is the updated general information section of the COVID-19 schedule to allow for reporting a first draw and/or a second draw PPP loan. This change also applies to the general information section of the COVID-19 S schedule. Section 44, Appendix K, is updated for new guidance issued under 2 CFR 200. Electronic signature. Sections 10, 11, and 12 have been updated regarding e-signed certification schedules. Electronically signed certification schedules must be uploaded through the CFR upload page, and the checkbox attestation must be selected accordingly. This is the signature attestation for the electronically signed certification pages. OMH Supplementals, Changes, and Highlights. A picture of the New York State Office of Mental Health building at 44 Holland Avenue in Albany. OMH has 4 supplemental schedules. Schedule OMH 1, Units of Service by Program Site. Appendix F provides the measurement for the units of service for each OMH program. The total units of service on OMH 1 transfers to CFR 1, line 13, and DMH 1, line 3. The total units of service on OMH 1 must match the aggregate total units of service on DMH 3 for the same program. Units of service are very important to us. They are used to determine the cost per unit of service for financial planning. This is an example of units of service for a clinic treatment program. The OMH 1 units of service by program is only completed for OMH programs that file a full CFR. Select a program and site from the drop-down boxes. Scroll down to your program, enter data, and save. Schedule OMH 2, Medicaid units of service by program site. OMH 2 is completed for program sites that accrued Medicaid fee-for-service or Medicaid managed care revenue for services provided. Units of service are reported separately. The total program units of service reported for Medicaid fee-for-service and Medicaid managed care will transfer from OMH 2 to CFR 1, lines 13A and 13B, respectively. The Medicaid units of service on the OMH 2 should not be more than the Medicaid units of service reported on the OMH 1. This is an example of Medicaid fee-for-service and Medicaid managed care units of service for a clinic treatment program. The OMH 2 Medicaid units of service by program site is only completed for OMH programs that file a full CFR and have program sites that are eligible to bill Medicaid for the services provided. This schedule is set up the same way as the OMH 1, except it has been updated to track units of service separately for Medicaid fee-for-service revenues and Medicaid managed care revenues. Each line has an A and a B for this purpose. This is the second half of the OMH 2 schedule. Schedule OMH 3, Client Information. Enter the number of clients served. The caseload at the start of the current period should equal the caseload at the end of the prior period. This is an example of a program without an ongoing caseload. The OMH 3 captures the number of persons served by the program and site for the year. The beginning and ending numbers on lines 1 and 4 will be 0. Indicate the same number of persons served on lines 2 and 3. These numbers will indicate how many people were seen and how many left. This is an example of a program with an ongoing caseload. Indicate the number of persons on the active caseload as of the beginning of the reporting period on line 1. Indicate the number of persons admitted to the program site during the reporting period on line 2. Indicate the number of persons terminated from active program enrollment during the reporting period on line 3. This should include all persons not seen or contacted within 90 days. Determine the active caseload as of the end of the reporting period on line 4 by adding lines 1 and 2 and subtracting line 3. Schedule OMH 4, Units of Service by Payor by Program Site. OMH 4 is for the OMH Licensed Clinic Treatment Program 2100. Providers must report units of service and revenue by Payor. Units of service data is used in the safety net payment calculation. Total units of service on OMH 4, line 15, should be equal or similar to OMH 1, line 16. This is an example of the OMH 4 schedule. The schedule must be completed based on date of service rendered and only for services provided during the reporting period. For the purposes of this schedule, a visit is defined as including all procedures provided to a patient on the same day and is referred to as a threshold visit. OMH Changes. Section 2, Submission Requirements. The OMH only and combination matrices were updated to allow Article 31 hospital providers to file an Article 28 abbreviated CFR. Sections 22 and 23 regarding the contract type and contract number for programs that do not receive age localities funding. Section 39, Appendix F, the addition of Program Code 5010, the deletion of Program Codes 6050 and 2980, and the revision to Program Code 6060. OMH highlights MHPD. OMH providers should continue to use MHPD to submit corrections, openings, and closures of programs. The programs and site reported on your CFR should match our concerts database. An attachment A is automatically generated and mailed with each desk review letter. It compares the programs listed in our concerts database versus what you reported on your CFR. Any discrepancies must be resolved. DOH supplementals, changes, and highlights. A full CFR is required that includes the schedules listed. Refer to Appendix HH for programs that must be reported on the CFR. And this slide shows how to determine the program site identification number and units of service. The Integrated Outpatient Services Clinic, IOS. On the CFR, the IOS clinic is reported under Program Code 2100 for OMH, 3520 for OASIS, and 1580 for DOH. An allocation between OMH, OASIS, and DOH must be made if the provider operated both OMH and OASIS clinics prior to being designated as an IOS clinic. Programs are required to maintain support, demonstrating they have used a reasonable method of allocating costs. Refer to Appendix GG for further instructions. OCFS, supplementals, changes, and highlights. A full CFR is required that includes schedules listed. Refer to Appendix II for programs that must be reported on the CFR. Section 51, Appendix R, Position Title Code 327 was added. And this slide shows how to determine the program site identification number and units of service. And now I'll pass off the presentation to Paul Sutton from OASIS.
Thank you. This is Paul Sutton with the Office of Addiction Services and Supports, and I'll be discussing some of OASIS highlights and changes. Okay, now OASIS has penalties for late submissions of your CFRs, and this is applicable to both funded and non-funded providers. And some of these penalties include imposition of fines, withholding of advance payments, and ultimately termination of state aid. Could be a suspension, limitation, or revocation of your operating certificate, and notification of noncompliance to the DOH in the case of Medicaid providers. Here is the contact information for the various departments. Depending on what questions you may have. If you have questions about your budget, you should reach out to budget, or questions about your state aid, you should reach out to the state aid, and so forth at the following addresses. Now, your CFR submission is not complete without the receipt of the required certification schedules and audited or reviewed financial statements. The preferred method of signature page and financial statement submission is the electronic filing through the upload page at the below link. OASIS is essentially paperless now, so please do not mail the original documents. Instead, providers must keep your original certification schedules and attestation statements corresponding to those emailed for the required retention period, and must be able to make these documents available upon request to OASIS and any other stakeholder or governmental controlling party. However, OASIS will continue to accept emailed PDF files as opposed to uploads for the CFR-I, II, III, IV, attestation, and financial statements, as long as they are we're using the proper naming convention as below. Now, all emails must be PDF files, and the DCN number listed on the certification schedules must match the DCN number of the most recent uploaded CFR files and the original signature copies that are maintained in your provider files as explained above. In order for your certifications to satisfy the submission requirements, the following issues should be avoided: partial images, blurred images, or illegible images. Finally, a new CFR-I, II, or III, and IV must be submitted for each new DCN number uploaded. A new CFR-II is not required. However, OASIS will accept an attestation reporting minor changes in lieu of the additional II. OASIS providers are responsible for uploading or updating their own contact information in the provider directory system, as at the link below. This should be done at the time of staff changes, and contact names, email addresses, and phone numbers should be updated. And this will ensure that providers and programs receive important information and communications from the OASIS Communications Office, as well as providing current contact names and phone numbers to prospective clients. The following changes have been made to the CFR manual. In Section 13, regarding the CFR-1, line 86, for prior period rate adjustments, this has been updated to say that this line is not applicable for OASIS service providers. Section 3 of the manual has been updated to in regards to if a service provider is receiving aid to localities funding through a county contract or direct contract with a specified reporting period, and you are required to submit an additional mini-abbreviated CFR specified by the county or direct contract, this has been updated to include that OASIS now reserves the right to require an uncertified full CFR in lieu of the additional mini-abbreviated. Section 59, Appendix Z, regarding in-contract versus out-of-contract, has been revised as follows. OASIS requires that service providers report all programs operational during the fiscal reporting period on all OASIS core schedules, the CFR1 to the DMH1. And this requirement applies to any and all combinations of the following: funded, certified programs, funded non-certified programs, and unfunded certified programs. In addition, a provider that receives state aid funding for any OASIS program must report all programs operated on the claiming schedules, the DMH2 and DMH3. However, if the provider does not operate any programs or receive state aid funding, then none of the programs need to be reported on the claiming schedules. In order to ensure accuracy, the Fiscal Audit and Review Unit, or FARU, will perform on-site visits, and the CFR Review Unit will perform desk reviews of end of CFR submissions. Any areas that need additional explanation or revision will be detailed in a CFR review and emailed to the provider. Failure to respond to the review may lead to withholding of funding or revocation of certification. The following are some examples of items that are covered in the review. Are the signature pages, financial statements completed and submitted? Are all active programs reported? Have the units of service been reported in the CFR 1, line 13, as per Appendix E, and do they reflect the MSDS? Does the CFR 2, column 1, match the financials? If not, is the reconciliation completed? Is the CFR 2A completed? Is the CFR 3 completed? If applicable, is line 38, the parent agency allocation, completed and submitted? Are the non-allowable expenses reported on CFR 1, line 40, or the CFR 3, line 17, adjusted out accordingly? Are hourly equivalents on the CFR 4 within reason? And these hourly equivalents can be derived at by dividing the total amount paid by the total hours paid. Have the CFR 5 and CFR 6 been completed? If the 6 is completed, is there an amount in column 9 which must be adjusted out on the CFR 3, line 41? Now I'll pass this off to the next speaker.
Hi, this is Paul Green from Oasis. Once we are done reviewing the core reports, the CFR 1 through the DMH1, then we will begin the review of the claiming reports, the DMH2 and the DMH3. It was suggested that you transfer the data from the DMH1 over to the DMH2, and then once you've done that, you can make manual adjustments to the DMH2 data if required. We would not expect adjustments to be made in the reporting of personal services, fringe benefits, OTPS expenses categories, unless there is also a change in method of accounting. However, adjustments are likely for the remaining categories. Vacation leave accruals, for instance, that number will not transfer. The software automatically will not transfer the vacation leave accruals over to the DMH2 because they are considered non-reimbursable expenses. However, equipment and property, the numbers that you transferred will transfer over, and then you can make adjustments as necessary. The CFR software has been updated to include drop-down detail boxes in order to individually list the adjustments from the core. Either select a predefined line or add a new line. Then for the new line, select either addition or subtraction to individually list the addition of a fully expensed item or the subtraction of a non-reimbursable expense item. The net amount of these program expenses will transfer to the respective DMH2 line 9 equipment and line 10 property. So this is a screenshot of the equipment line. So the amount transfers over from the DMH1 line 10. You will make additions and subtractions, and you will do that through these drop-down detail boxes. And then the end result will transfer to the DMH2 line 9 as the total equipment being claimed. This is a screenshot of property. It's handled the same way. Administrative expenses are handled a little bit differently. They are to be reported on the DMH2 line 12, but they are only proportionately non-reimbursable, okay? If you also have programs through another agency, such as OMH, OPWDD, or even if you have other programs on the CFR 2 column 9, only a portion of these expenses from the CFR 3 will not be reimbursable. So we ask you to do the calculation. Just as a side note, sometimes I'll get a CFR in where the provider will remove the depreciation from the CFR 3, and they'll remove it directly on the CFR 3. That's not acceptable because that will change your agency admin being distributed. So it has to be adjusted out here on DMH2 line 12 proportionately. And this is a drop-down detail box that shows over to the right under description. It says adjustment for non-reimbursable service expense, 1365, and percentage of non-reimbursable admin expense, 1453. Those amounts flow to line 12. Okay. Additionally, early retirement incentive payments and severance pay would be reported on DMH2 line 12. An expense considered non-reimbursable for a provider would also be considered non-reimbursable for a related party. Therefore, any depreciation expense or mortgage interest expense noted on a CFR 5, Section C, columns 4 or 5, which was used to validate the expense in Section B, may need to be adjusted out either fully or partially based on the source of the expense. So we discussed that yesterday. We discussed in the CFR 5, if you have a space cost, you have to complete Section B and Section C, okay? Section B is reporting the expense, and Section C is determining the related party's actual cost. And again, you're only allowed to claim the lower of fair market value or the actual cost. So in this particular case, this is Section C. It shows that the $67,620 was the allowable cost for the core reports. But if you go down further to Section C towards the bottom of the screen, you'll see that that includes depreciation expense of $10,000 and interest expense of $25,000. So those would be expenses that would be considered non-reimbursable. I understand that this is it's a complicated issue, and if you need assistance in completing this, feel free to contact us. Once a review is completed, we'll send an email with all the review items to be addressed, and we'll expect a review response generally within 30 days. If you agree with the findings, the CFR should be revised and validated, obtain the DCN number, and submit it in PDF format along with your written response. Once we have confirmed the corrections were made, we will then ask you to upload the CFR and submit the required certification pages. If you do not agree with our findings for one reason or another, please provide additional explanations along with supporting documentation and clarification of your position. Okay, and now I will transfer it to the next presenter. Thank you.
Hello, this is Francis Vasilio with the CFR unit at OPWDD. I'm going to cover the OPWDD highlights, supplementals, and changes. First off, IRAs, supervised IRAs. It's a little different from most other programs, although there's a wrinkle to that this year due to COVID. But aside from providing the actual units of service provided, for that program you also will report on the same line any therapeutic leave days that you bill for and any retainer days that you bill for. For programs 0311 and 0312, those are two of the respite programs. Sometimes you bill on a per diem basis, and if that's the case, convert those per diem billings to 96 quarter-hour units of service. Some of our programs require you to report each site separately. Those include the ICFs, the site-based group day hab, the IRAs, and the pre-vote. It's recommended that you set up your ledger to be able to track charges to the sites directly. We know that that's not always feasible. You may have 2 or 3 IRAs in the same building and staff share and supplies are shared. In that case, we have in Appendix FF some recommended methodologies for allocating some of those expenses to the various sites. Penalties. As I mentioned yesterday, OPWDD has some of the stiffest penalties because any of our financial withholdings are not reimbursable even after you come into compliance. Those penalties are, if you are late, and that can mean even if your CFR is in but you don't have all the documents in, you can be subject to a 2% withholding of all your Medicaid submissions, billings, until the end of the month following your coming into compliance. And as bad as that is, if you haven't come into compliance for filing your 2021 CFR, you are subject to, by August 1st, you're subject to a 50% penalty. This is because the federal government has said they're going to withdraw their support for your agency, and since half of our Medicaid funding comes from them, we're forced to reduce your reimbursement rate by 50%. That can and has at times put agencies out of business. So please take these deadlines seriously. CFR expense line 68 is for OPWDD, and there are several aspects to it. If you are being reimbursed for your day treatment, day hab, or pre-vote programs for your transportation to and from home to the site, you're permitted to get reimbursed for that cost, but you have to report that transportation expense in a particular way. You would use line 670 if you use your own staff and vehicles, or 880 if you contract out with a transportation company. You would itemize all your expenses in those program columns. Once you have the total, you would allocate that expense back to the different program sites using line 68B. 68A is for transportation within a campus, say, for moving people from, say, an ICF over to a site, which may require busing or whatever. 68B is if the two from their home to your site. You itemize the expenses in, say, 670, you allocate it back to each site on line 68B. When you, on CFR 1, line 63, you have total property expenses for your program. we need you to report here on line 68D that portion of that total property expense that was for your program administration. Now, if you've got a big room and there's a cubicle at one end where you've got the program administrator works, that's not something you need to allocate out separately. But if you've got an office for your IRA, for where you administer all your IRAs, and it's located in a different location, then the expenses for that program administration property should be reported on line 68D. This is an information line, so it's not going to count the expense twice. You're just going to report it here so we know how much of that expense for your program was for administration. Line 68E, the feds would like to know how much they're spending for day services for your ICF residents. And so if you are providing those day services yourself, that's pretty easy. Whatever you bill Medicaid for the day services, you would report on line 68E for that site. If you are contracting out with another agency to provide day services, then you would have to reach out to that other agency to find out how much they're billing Medicaid for the service, and you report that there. Or you may have a combination. Some of your ICF residents are being administered to by or given this service by another agency, some by yourselves, in which case the combined total for that site would go on this line 68E. We have 3 supplemental schedules for OPWDD. The first one only applies if you have ICFs, and you have to give us some information about your ICF. And if you're providing medical supplies, then you mark that on the first schedule, and that gets you to our second schedule, which is OPWDD 2. And then this one, you have to give us some detailed information about the medical supplies that you're providing to your ICF residents. The third supplemental schedule is OPWDD 5, and that only applies to certain of our programs that are listed on the screen. And the way it works is you would look to the rate setting unit from DOH has where their site where they post your rates, and you would look for the amount of property money they've been giving to you extra. This is at the OPA site, and they'll tell you in this posting. Now, it used to be posted as OPWDD 5 information or whatever. Now it's included with your rate sheets, but they'll tell you that they're giving you X amount of dollars, and they'll tell you the purpose. For instance, it may be for mortgage interest. So you would report whatever they say they've given you as extra funding. You'll report it on the appropriate line on OPWDD 5 in column 1. In column 2, you'll report the expense that you have that applies to that same purpose. And in column 3 of this schedule, we tell you where you will find that expense in CFR 1. Now, everything in CFR 1 on that line may not be applicable to what they're giving you the funding for. So whatever amount is, you'll list in column 2. If you're receiving no funding, you're still going to have to fill out an OPWDD 5 for each of these sites. And all you have to do is put a 0 in column 1 and a 0 in column 2, and you're all set. If you haven't received extra funding for all these different possible reasons, you don't have to go through and put zeros all the way down all the empty spaces. You don't have to fill out zeros in all of column 2. There should only be a number in column 2 if there's a number in column 1. Column 4 is generated by the program itself. It's the difference between column 1 and 2. And column 5 is where you give the explanation for the difference. Now, if your expense is greater than the amount of extra funding you're receiving, one of the drop-down options is unfunded. That's the most common thing we see. If, for instance, your expense is not as great as your extra funding you're receiving, there may be a legitimate reason for that. For instance, you may be using a different depreciation schedule, and that would possibly cause a difference there. So that's OPWDD 5. We do have a couple of minor changes. The first one, it says here job title code. I realized that was a typo after we'd already sent this out. That's really a funding source code, 192 for DSP. Previously, it said DSP 3.25, but the DSP percentage changes from year to year, and the way they did it this year, it actually can vary slightly from agency to agency. So we just changed the funding source code for 192 to just say DSP. Also, due to COVID, we funded some retainer days for some of the other programs. They had pre-voc and day treatment. You would go ahead and report those on CFR 1, line 13A, like your other units of service that you provided. And now I'm going to transfer you to the next presenter.
Good morning. This is Jahida Benatar from New York State Education Department. On this section, we will cover SED highlights, supplementals, and changes. We will start with the rate setting unit website. On this page, you will find manuals and forms, methodology letters that describe how a particular year's tuition rates were calculated, certified tuition rate. You have to register to access to RSU tuition rate processing application through CEDFIN, to review tuition rate calculations, and to access the CEDFIN help screens. We have also included this link to register to receive SED rate setting issue notification by electronic mail of the latest memoranda and other technical assistance documents available on the RSU website. Late submission penalty. For SED provider, no enters expense will be reimbursed for entities that file cost reports more than 90 days after January 1st for fiscal year filers. Non-reimbursable enters expense will affect the tuition rates for the tuition rate year 2 years after the report year associated with the required financial reports and will apply to all tuition rate for that year, prospective, appeal, recon, and audit. An interest penalty due to late submission of the 2021 CFR will apply to all tuition rate for the 2022 and 2023 rate year. SED supplemental schedules. There are 2 supplemental schedules specific to SED, SED1 and SED4. SED1, Program and Enrollment Data. This schedule is to be completed by all service providers requiring tuition rates from SED for school age, preschool, and infant programs. The top half of SED1 collects student enrollment by program by full-time equivalent, line 100 to 107. These enrollment figures should correspond to the tuition revenues reported on lines 69 and or 88 to 92 and or line 94 of Schedule CFR. Report the total days the program operated on SED1, line 109, Enter the number of days in the full-time program during the September to June school year and the number of days in the full-time program during the preceding July and August if the program was approved to operate during that period. The school year must be at least 180 days, and the summer program must report a minimum of 30 days. For special education itinerant services on Schedule SED1, line 111, report billable units, half-an-hour units, on the basis of enrollment as mandated by student IEPs. The unit of service should be reported in appropriate programs. 9135 to 9139 individual session, 9140 to 9144 for group session of 2, and 9145 to 9149 if they received services in group of 3 or more. On Schedule SED1, line 115, report the actual IEP mandated half-an-hour units of service provided for our CET session. Actual CET units of service should be reported on per session basis, non-prorated. For example, if you have a half-an-hour group CET session with 3 students, should be reported as 1 unit of service. Calculate care days by multiplying total FTEs by session days. Enrollment is reported as a full-time equivalent. Student is counted as a full-time 1 FTE, illness admitted after the start of the school year or discharged before the end of the school year or determined to be illegally absent. FTE is calculated based on weeks enrolled divided by the number of weeks program is in session. Section 32 of the CFR manual, page 32A.2, listed more details. Student FTE is also prorated when child is in program for less than 5 hours. FTE is calculated by number of hours in program divided by 5 hours. Full day programs are 5 hours of instruction. Care days are used to calculate a per day tuition rate, which is used in the rate setting methodology. Care days are established by multiplying the student FTE times the session days in the school year. For example, if we have a 25 student times 180 days for school year and 30 days for summer, a total of 5,250 care days. Refer to the CFR manual for more information on FTE calculation. When reporting student enrollment FTEs for students with one-to-one aides, include the student FTE in both the 92 program and the program the student is enrolled in. On Schedule SED1, lines 201 to 903 details the total number of classrooms operated and student FTEs enrolled by program for each SED-approved classroom ratio. For special class and integrated setting programs, do not include non-disabled student in your ratio. For example, if a program approved as 15, 1, 2, with 1 special education teacher and 1 paraprofessional for 7 disabled students and 1 paraprofessional for 8 non-disabled students, report the ratio as 7-1-1, not 15-1-2. And this is the screenshot of SED1 schedule. Related services SED4. SED4 is broken down into 3 sections: capacity, needs, and productivity. SED4 is required for all rate-based programs except for CET programs. SED4 not required if SED provider operates only CET program. Schedule RS2 does not need to be sent to SED. Please retain a copy of this schedule for your files. An Excel version of RS2 schedule is available on the Rate Setting Unit website under Manuals and Forms. SED providers should use the data compiled on Schedule SED4 to report CFR4 information for direct care-related services staff. And this is a picture of SED4. Instruction to RS2 may be found on RS2 on RSU website. Complete a separate RS2 for each related services type. Schedule RS2, column 6A. Report session in half-hour blocks of time, prorate as needed. For example, if it's in 45 minutes, equal to 1.5 sessions, and etc. Schedule RS2 has a new columns. Column number 13, to report sessions not provided due to accessibility issue related to delivering services via telepractice. SED changes. In Section 8.0 for general instructions of the CFR manual, details were added to the state agency specific instructions section for items with changing reporting requirements. SED units of service, cost, and revenues are now to be reported by county. FAQs also provides information on this change. CFR Manual Section 32A provide new instruction regarding the reporting of mandated versus provided SED units of service in item 5 and 6. Section 33C of the CFR Manual and the COVID-19 as informational schedule for SED only have been added effective July 1st of 2019. The COVID-19 as schedule should be used by providers to report SED-only program net changes in program administration and program site expenses and revenues that are specifically related to COVID-19. Section 41.0, Appendix H. The following SED program have had program title, description, and or unit of service modified. The following SED program codes were added, and the 9039 SED program code was deleted. Reporting instruction for personal protective equipment. Personal protective equipment, PPE, related to the operation of the program site should be reported on Schedule CFR1, line 36. Bulk purchases of equipment exceeding $5,000 should be depreciated and reported on Schedule CFR1, line 45. Please refer to Appendix O for further guidelines. Please note that CFR1, line 36 and line 45 are both classified as a direct care in the calculation of the tuition rates and the application of non-direct care cost parameter. And now I will transfer it to the next presenter.
Good morning. This is Alpa Amin from OPWDD. I will cover steps to a successful CFR submission. Perform data entry for all schedules and then validate submission to get a document control number and prepare for upload. You should connect to the CFRS upload page on the OMH website and individually upload CFR data, financial statements, and certification. Validate submission and assign DCN. From the toolbar, select Utility and then select Validate Submission, Assign DCN from drop-down menu. Click Perform Validation to validate the entire submission. If there are any errors, a message box pops up highlighting and detailing the error in yellow. In most cases, clicking on the error will take the user to the screen containing the error. Correct any errors and repeat the validation process. When there are no errors in the submission, the software will assign a document control number. Now that the DCN number has been assigned, from the toolbar, select Reports in order to view or print all or specific schedule from your CFR. You have the option to select individual schedules or click Expected to highlight all schedules in the submission type completed. Clicking Send to Printer sends the document to the user default printer. The default is to print on legal size paper. When printing to 8.5 by 11 size paper, first print to PDF and then adjust the paper size. Clicking Write to File displays the document on the computer screen in Notepad. Inventory lists the program site defined and other identifying information about what is in the submission. This can be useful in diagnosing problems. Advanced allows for printing only selected advice agency and/or county schedule. Prepare for upload. Where is the current destination for Prepare for Upload file located? If your CFRS software was installed to the default location, your upload file will be located in the directory dependent on your software version. Or you can use the Browse for a new directory if you want to install the file in an alternative local or LAN location. After the upload file has been prepared, a confirmation messenger box pops up. Take note of where you are saving the file by either printing the screen or saving to your desktop, as you will need to locate the file in the latest step of the submission process. Click Close to close the messenger box, then click Go to CFRS Upload page. Uploading a submission. Pop-up window informs you that you are being redirected to the OMH Upload portal page. Click Yes to continue. From the bottom of the screen, select Upload your CFR submission or financial statement. You will also be able to upload the completed budget, certification pages, supplemental attestation schedule, and parent agency administration allocation from this screen. Enter your agency's 5-digit provider agency code and press Next. Choose type of the documents to upload from the drop-down box. Follow the steps as outlined in the software. You will have to go through this process several times as the CFR, financial statements, and certifications need to be submitted separately. This is an example of confirmation email. It is recommended that you save a copy of this email. To backup a data from toolbar, select Utility and then select Backup Data from drop-down menu. You must close all screen in order to effect the changes in the Advanced Banner page. The software will apply the changes to the last file that you were in. Remember to back up your file in 2 or more locations. From the Help menu, there is a guidance to assist in the backing up of all CFRS data, backing up of a single submission. Converting CFR4 detail to CBR4. The Consolidated Budget Report is a series of schedules created in the CFRS software and used to fulfill fiscal reporting requirements related to the receipt of state aid. When importing master data from a CFR to a CBR or vice versa, there is a second step which includes using the Convert CFR4 to CBR4. After the initial conversion, you will receive the following reminder message regarding the second step. The submission type has changed. CBR4 position title codes have been imported. However, you will need to use the Convert CBR4 to CFR4 screen on the Utility menu to transfer your position title codes to CFR 4. Change and delete funding source. From the Utilities menu, you can change or delete funding source codes. Update and delete agency definitions. From the Utilities menu, you can update or delete the agency definition. This screen shows the links for online help regarding what's new in each version of CFR. Now I will pass off to next speaker.
Good morning, this is Michelle Chalinsky with the Office of Mental Health. Next, we'll be going over the COVID-19 informational schedule. The COVID-19 schedule is a supplemental CFR schedule. It was developed to help understand the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on each provider. It is required for all CFR submission types for 5 of the 6 New York State agencies that require their programs be reported on the CFR. Those 5 agencies are OMH, OPWDD, OASIS, DOH, and OCFS. The COVID-19 schedule is completed independent of other CFR schedules, and the information reported on it does not transfer to any other CFR schedule. The instructions to the COVID-19 schedule can be found in Section 33B of the CFR manual. The schedule is completed using the accrual basis of accounting, and it is not subject to certification, but should be reviewed for reasonableness. The COVID-19 schedule is used to report increases in program administration and program site expenses and revenues in the reporting period on a program site specific basis that are specifically related to COVID-19. As with other CFR schedules, if there is no other applicable line, we would report the expense or revenue on the applicable other line on the COVID schedule. There are 3 sections to the COVID-19 schedule that need to be reviewed and or completed. The first is the general information section, where the provider is asked to review and answer a series of questions. First, 1A. The question states, did your agency receive a first draw Paycheck Protection Program loan from the SBA? And you select yes or no. The question repeats a second time, this time for the second draw PPP loan. If your agency received a PPP loan, then they move to question 1B, and you're asked to enter the amount received. And then you move to 1C, and you enter the amount of the PP1 or PPP2 loan that your agency received. Then in question 2A, provider is asked if the loan has been forgiven in the CFR period. They answer that for the first draw PPP loan and the second draw PPP loan, if provided they received it. Then in question 2B, the provider is asked if the PPP first draw loan or PPP second draw loan was forgiven in the reporting period. And if it was, the date is entered. And on question 2C, if the loan was forgiven, the amount of the PPP-1 or PPP-2 loan is entered. And finally, in question 3, the provider is asked to report the total amount of revenue and gains on the extinguishment of debt recorded in the CFR reporting period that was attributable to COVID-19 funding, grants, loan forgiveness, contributions or donations, awards, and or tax credits. Include in that total revenue gains COVID-19 grants awarded for federal and state agencies and private foundations such as FEMA, the FCC, the SBA, the amount of the loan forgiveness from the PPP, federal tax credits that are recorded as revenue, and any donations received that are earmarked for the dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Next, complete the second section, which is the program site data. This is completed on a program and site basis. The first section relates to expenses. And as a reminder, you are to report the increased expenses related to dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Some expenses that may qualify are increased expenses related to personal protective equipment, increased personal services as a result of differential pay or hazard pay, temporary housing expenses for COVID-19 positive residents or exposed staff, increased cleaning services and machines, expenses related to setting up telehealth services, expenses related to storage facilities and security measures, FEMA costs for emergency medical services. Next, complete the revenue section of the program site data tab. Report only the COVID-19 funding that was recorded as revenue in the CFR reporting period. Some examples of revenue are CARES Act loans that have been forgiven, such as the PPP or the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. Also report program rate changes related to COVID-19, such as enhanced rates, retainer day billings, flexible billing that would not normally qualify as service. Federal grants, state grants, and other grants from other governmental agencies are also reported in this section, as well as donations and federal tax credits. Line 64, federal grants, captures grants that are awarded from federal agencies such as the U.S. Department of HHS, the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program, FEMA, the FCC, and federal tax credits are also reported as revenue on this line. The third section to complete is personal services. Report only the personal services expenses that were incurred by your agency in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. Personal services data is entered in the same manner as for Schedule CFR 4. For each position title code that is added, enter the amount paid. The total personal services expense for each program site transfers to line 1 of the program site data section of the COVID-19 schedule. For more information on completing the personal services section of the COVID-19 schedule, please refer to section 16.0 of the CFR manual for the instructions for Schedule CFR 4. And next, Shahida will be discussing the COVID-19 as schedule.
Hi again, this is Jahida from SED. On this section, we will cover COVID-19 as informational schedule. The COVID-19 S is required for all CFR submissions from SED providers, and it completed independent from the other CFR schedules and the COVID-19 schedule. The COVID-19 S schedule is used to report the net changes in program administration and program site expenses and revenues in the reporting period on a program site specific basis that are specifically related to COVID-19. For additional information on how to complete the COVID-19 as schedule, please refer to the instruction in section 33C, page 33C.3. The COVID-19 as schedule will not be subjected to certification, but should be reviewed for reasonableness. This is a screenshot of the section for COVID-19 as informational schedule. Complete the questions in the general information section of the COVID-19 as schedule. For question number 1A, select yes or no. If yes, proceed to question 1B. If no, proceed to question 3. For question 2A, again select yes or no. If yes, proceed to question 2B. If no, proceed to question 3. For question number 4, if selected yes, please make sure you are reporting the appropriate expenses and revenues on the COVID-19 as schedule. If you are a multi-funded agency, you will need to report the SED data separate from the other agencies you are reporting to. COVID-19 as expenses. For personal services, program site and program administration. The personal services section of the COVID-19 as schedule is completed in the same manner as the program site specific section of the schedule CFR 4. For each position title code that is added to the program, the standard work week is selected, the hours paid, and the amount paid are entered. The total personal services expenses for each program transferred to line 1 of the program site data section of the COVID-19 as schedule. For more information, please refer to instruction for Schedule CFR 4, Section 16.0 of the CFR manual. Contracted direct care and clinical personal services. The contracted direct care and clinical personal services section of the COVID-19 as schedule is completed in the same manner as the program site specific section of the schedule CFR 4A. For each position title code that is added to the program, the hours paid and the amount paid are entered. The total personal services expense for each program transferred to line 20 of the program site data section of the COVID-19 as schedule. For additional information, please refer to the instruction for Schedule CFR 4A, Section 17.0 of the CFR manual. Other than personal services expenses reported on COVID-19 as schedule should be the net changes in expenses determined by the provider to be related to COVID-19. For example, if food costs were down because children were remote learning, line 6 of net change in costs incurred by a program in providing meals or snacks to the program participant would reflect a negative amount. If supplies and materials for non-household increased because the provider bought additional PPE, line 21 on COVID-19 as would reflect the amount of PPE cost only. If any of program-specific or program administration non-allowable costs have been included on Schedule CFR 1 through CFR 5, they should also be included on line 51 on COVID-19 as scheduled. Report the detail of adjustment to report costs by program site along with the corresponding amounts and line number where the cost is reported on Schedule CFR 1. Refer to Appendix X for more information regarding non-allowable expenses, and please note that negative entries are not allowed on this line. And this is the screenshot of the COVID-19 as schedule. The COVID-19 as revenue. Report in revenue section of the COVID-19 as schedule only the net change in revenue and gain of the extinguishment of debt recorded in the period that were related to COVID-19. For the following line items of revenue, only report the revenues received after netting out any negotiated contract adjustment, line 53 and line 59. For example, if agency X, Y, and Z has a published fees of $105 a visit and has contractually agreed to $75 per visit for patients covered by health insurance company. For every billable visit by person covered by health insurance, X, Y, and Z will report $75 in revenue, not $105, with a $30 adjustment to revenue to be reported in COVID-19 as scheduled. This is the COVID-19 as revenue lines. Line 55, 56, 57, 58, 61, and 62 are not applicable to SED. Thank you very much for attending this training, and I will pass it to the next presenter.
Hi, this is Paul Green from the Office of Addiction Services and Supports. The remainder of the presentation is directed towards agencies that submit a claiming document, a DMH2 and DMH3. If your agency does not, then you may leave at this time. Agencies that file a claiming document include those receiving state aid or local aid in the form of net deficit funding. Agencies that do not file a claiming document include OASIS, OMH, and OPWDD providers that do not receive any state aid for any of their programs. Also, SED, DOH, OCFS, and not-for-profit providers. So again, if you're an SED, DOH, OCFS, a not-for-profit, or you do not receive any state aid, then you can leave the presentation at this time. If you are unsure whether you receive claiming or not, just stay with us. It's only going to take a few more minutes. Okay. So we move on. First things first, budget modifications. If you haven't already done so, compare your projected expenses revenues to your approved budget now. If you need modification, you can contact the people that we provided the emails to earlier and ask for assistance. But it's always better to do it earlier than later. Claiming. Claiming is the DMH2 and the DMH3, and it generally starts from the transferring of data from the DMH1. Okay, so I said yesterday that the DMH1 is a bridge. It's a bridge from the core reporting to the claiming reporting. All the programs that are on your DMH1 will now transfer over to the DMH2. You do this by, after you select the transfer to DMH2, it comes up with this screen, and over to the right, you'll see five programs. You can select which programs you wish to transfer. You can select them all, you can select one, or such. Then, over to the left, you can pick the county you wish to transfer it to and the percentage, okay? In this case, I've selected 3 of them, and I'm going to transfer them to New York County, and it's 100%. Now, to be honest with you, I could also, if I was wanted to send 50% to one county and 50% to another county, I could do that also. So I would select the county, I would transfer 50% of it, and then I'd come back, select the other county, select the same program, and transfer 50%. That may not happen much in the New York City area, but it does happen in upstate New York. So once you've transferred these, it will come up with this warning saying basically there's already data on the DMH2 for those programs. Do you wish to override it? And the answer is yes. So you may be transferring this more than once. And every time you go to transfer it, if there's already data there, it will ask you if you wish to override it. So the answer is yes. And now it says the information was successfully transferred, okay? But it does say, note, some of the DMH2 lines require detail lines. You may need to edit those lines on DMH2 and add the detailed data. By that I mean the total for Medicaid fee-for-service, the total $449,000 transferred over, but the drop-down detail box was not completed. So I would have to go into the DMH2 for line 17A. I would have to click on Add. I'd type in Base Medicaid. I'd put in the amount. And so then when I saved it and closed it, the drop-down detail box would match the total amount in the column on the CFR, column 7, on the row 17A of the CFR. Okay, so anyone that has an asterisk in the front of it, any row that has an asterisk in front of it, has a drop-down detail box, and if there's any amount in that row, then you'll have to go into the detail box to make sure that the data matches. If it does not, you will not be able to validate at the end. Okay. Okay, so there's 5 tabs: expense, revenues, adjustments to revenues, deficit funding, and expense variance. Okay. On the first tab, there are a couple of lines, and they're going to be white lines, and they're going to need to be filled in. So let's start up here at the first is the contract type. Is it a direct contract, direct with the state, or is it a local contract through a local government or a city? Okay. You have to select that, and then you have to select the accounting method. Is it going to be accrual, modified accrual, or cash basis? You would then put in your state contract number or local government contract number. Note, state contract numbers usually start with a C0. Okay, local contract numbers can be almost anything, whatever has been given to you by the local government unit. Okay, but you should make sure that these match. If it's a C0, then I'm expecting a direct contract. If it's not a C0, if it's something else, then I'm expecting a local contract. If some of our software is set up specifically to accept the correct ones, and if you select the wrong one, you'll have to resubmit, and that leads to more signature pages and such. So direct contract and local contract are important to select the correct one. Okay. Program type and program code carried over, so that should already be there. Next, you would put in your expenses. Well, I'm sorry, your expenses are already there. And again, we wouldn't expect too much in line of changes between your personal services, your fringe benefits, or your OTPS. However, we would expect changes in your equipment and property and any adjustments also. So why would we expect? Because your equipment, if you bought a piece of equipment this year for $30,000, you're going to want to expense that full $30,000. We probably gave you that money in advance for that. So you would need to report that $30,000 in order for your claim to match the revenues that to reconcile with the revenues we gave you. At the same time, you're also going to remove any depreciation expense that is carried over from the DMH1, okay? because if it's being depreciated, that means it was probably purchased last year, and or such, and you would want to remove that because you're expensing it fully this year. So that's the difference. That's the big difference between the claim and the core, is that you're expensing all your big purchases this year, and you're removing the depreciation that you've already shown on your core reports. So those are your expenses, and you'll notice your total expenses are $769,000. So then we go to the next tab, revenues, and we list all our revenues. And there's Medicaid fee-for-service, managed care, other third parties, and then you have net deficit funding down here. That's the state aid. That's line 28. That's the money that comes from our agencies, and it's either comes directly from the state or through the local government unit. And then you have your total gross revenue, okay? In this particular case, your gross revenue exceeds your expenses, so you're probably not going to get all of that $174,000 in net deficit funding. You're not going to get to keep it all because you don't have enough expenses to cover it. So we'll go to the third tab, which is adjustments to revenue. Adjustments to revenue is basically geared towards determining line 43, net operating cost. Net operating cost, as I said yesterday, is your total expenses for the program less all revenues received except for net deficit funding, okay? So in this case, if you take your total expenses and you subtract all the other revenues, the Medicaid, the charity, and this and that, you would come down to a net operating cost of $101,000. And again, you had $174,000 of state aid, but you only need $101,000, so we'd probably be taking back the remainder. Okay. Line 43, net operating cost. That's important to remember because when you go to the next tab, deficit funding, we want you to report the deficit funding, and line 49, total deficit funding, must equal line 43. Okay, so line 49 must equal line 43 or it won't allow you to advance. So in that case, there's two ways to do this. There is, you could put in the lower of the net operating cost or the net deficit funding received. Okay, so the lower of those two would be the net operating cost was $101,000, or the net deficit funding received was $174,000. In which case you'd put in the $101,000. That would come down to line 49 would be the $101,000, which would match line 43 net operating cost. Okay. In the past, we've had providers put in the 174 here and then put in a negative for non-funded, and you could do that for a program that did not receive state aid. However, if you cannot do that for a program that receives state aid. We do not want a negative number on line 48. If you have any additional questions on this, you can speak with your specific state agency that you're dealing with. But OASIS definitely does not want a negative number on line 48. All right, so that's your deficit funding. So your final tab is this expense variance tab. Okay, what that is, that was only added the last couple of years, and it is the difference between what was reported on DMH1 and DMH2. Okay, so here's an example where there was a difference in equipment and a difference in adjustments. If there's a difference, it's going to require an explanation of what that difference is. So it's a short sentence. You don't have to get into a paragraph. Adjustment for non-reimbursable equipment expense or adjustment for percentage of non-reimbursable admin expense. Okay, but that is going to be a requirement, I believe, to validate. So that is your 5 tabs of the DMH2. Once you have completed that, you're pretty much good to go. But here's a couple more things that you can do. I said yesterday that the core reporting goes to one department and the claims reporting goes to another department, and those two departments may have different requirements. They may want to see this report differently. So I told you yesterday how you could combine two site codes to make it one column on the claim. Well, here I'm going to tell you how to take one column and split it into two. I just had this recently. The provider uploaded a budget with a 2050-00 and a 2050-01. Okay, so they wanted it. They got the budget approved, two separate, basically two separate sites. However, they only have one PRU or site code for it. So on the core reporting, I told them they had to combine it into one column on the core reporting, but when it came to the claim, the county wanted to see it separately. So what you would do there is you would see the program that you're talking about, and you would click on Define a DMH Only program up in the top left. Click on that, and it asks you which program are you referring to, and then please enter the index code for the new program. Okay? You would then click on that, and it creates just a DMH only column for you to put in the information, to split the information from one into two. Okay? And the only trick here is you got to remember whatever you're taking out of the one, whatever you put into the two, you got to take out of the one. So combine these two columns should equal the amount that was originally reported on the core with any adjustments. All right, so that is a way to, again, satisfy the claims department if they require something to be split into two. So in summary, DMH2 is completed on a New York State agency and county-specific basis. The method of accounting must be indicated over each column containing fiscal data and can report on a full accrual, modified accrual, or cash basis. Direct or local contract types must be selected and a contract number entered for each reporting period, each reporting program. Direct contracts generally start with C0. If there is no local contract, if you do not have a local contract number, enter the first 7 letters of the county name. In your case, it would be New York without a space in between. Agency administration is distributed between New York State agencies using ratio value. Allocation methodology. Within OASIS and OPWDD schedules, the software calculated ratio value must be used. Okay. Equipment may be expensed rather than depreciated. Equipment costing $5,000 or more per unit having a useful life of 2 years must be reported on line 9. And revenue detail must be provided on the other lines. Approved New York State CFRS software provides line detail boxes to enter this data. And then line detail boxes are also provided for the following types of revenue and such. Okay, so now, scheduled DMH2 is not automatically updated. So if you've successfully uploaded this CFR, you felt pretty good about it, you sent it to us, and we got into a review on it, and we found an issue, something way back on a CFR 1 or the CFR 4, and we asked you to make a correction. And you happily make the correction, and then you're ready to send me the revised CFR. Well, you got to remember, you made a correction to the core, it has to be transferred over to the claim again. Okay? If not, the claim will not automatically update. It'll still be sitting there with the old number on it. So you got to remember, and that's why when you go to transfer it, it says there's already data here. Do you want to override it? And the answer is yes. DMH3 is it's actually a very easy schedule to complete. Okay, there should be one DMH3 for each program on a DMH2. All right. You start out by state agency, picking the state agency, picking the county, and then picking the program. And what this is all about is funding source codes. We gave you money, and with the money, we should have given you a piece of paper that said what the funding source code is associated with that money. Okay. Hopefully, we gave you that. Now we're asking you to tell us in the CFR format so that we have it in this system, what was that funding source code associated with that money. All right. Occasionally it changes from year to year. We get a new funding source code and get rid of an old one. So that's something to note. But here's what you do. You're going to select the program 2050-00. You're going to go down to the bottom. You're going to select the funding source code 013S. Okay. Everything else should pretty much match the DMH2 because, again, a DMH3 is going with a DMH2. So if you selected direct contract before, you should select direct again. If you accrual accounting method and some of these things are already predefined for you. But then you get down to number of persons served per year. That depends on the program. Some of the programs require persons served per year. Some of them do not. Number of units of service. That should probably match your CFR 1 units of service. Okay. Total adjusted expenses less applied net revenue. Applied net revenue is all the revenue you received besides net deficit funding. And then it brings it down to net operating cost of the $101,000. Okay. Now, if you put the wrong number in here and hit save, it's going to come up with an error code saying you've got to change that number to this number. Okay. So to be honest with you, sometimes when I'm doing this in testing, I enter a number and then just hit save, and it tells me what I've done wrong. So you can probably do that also. Contract number C002050, that should match the DMH2. So everything on this DMH3 should match the DMH2. The biggest issue is, like I said before, sometimes a funding source code carried over from last year, you imported from last year, but it's no longer a good funding source code, so you want to change it. Well, if you go to the middle of the screen and select a new funding source code, then you'll be left with 2, and you'll have a trouble validating. Okay, so it won't pass validations. So remember, bottom left corner, click on Change Funding Source Code. Over to the right, it'll say current funding source code is 013S. You want to change it to what? Select it, complete update, and it changes it. Okay. It's a simple little thing, but to be honest with you, if you don't do it right, you'll end up with 2. And then it'll ask you, why didn't you complete the information for both of them? All right. If that's the case, if you end up with more than one, as was said earlier, you would close out of the program, get back to the white screen, and then you'd go up to Utilities, and from Utilities, you'd scan down to Update, Delete Funding Source Code. You'd click on that, and then you could just delete the old funding source code. So that's in Utilities. You have access to that. All right. Now, the other thing is county. If you want to change the county, sometimes I use this sample for the upstate providers, and I go in and I change it from New York City to Niagara County. So you would just click on the Change County button, put the new county in, complete update, and you're all set. Here's an example where we had roughly $100 million worth of expenses, but we had them from 2 different funding source codes. Okay, it's an old example, but in this case, the funding source code 072B, and then down below on line 12, they had $485,000 of expenses and such. Okay. Go over to the right, and you'll see program totals by county. And the total over to the right is 972, which means there must be another funding source code, because between that funding source code and this next funding source code, 073B, they add up to $972,000. Okay. So that's what this is over to the right. It's a running total of all the funding source codes for that program, and that can help you if you're ever having problems trying to validate. You can always look over to the right and see, because maybe there's some erroneous information on a different funding source code for this program, and that's keeping you from validating. All right. So that is that, and now we move on to the funding source summary. For OASIS and OMH, the contract number and type indicated for each program on a DMH2 will be transferred to the DMH3. For OPWDD, at least one contract number and type, state or local combination, indicated for each program on DMH3 must match the information indicated for the program on DMH2. The DMH3 is completed on a New York State agency and county specific basis. Funding source codes are found in Appendix N of the CFR manual. Contract numbers must be entered and contract type must be designated. For each funding source, enter person served per year, units of service, total adjusted expenses, applied net revenue, and net operating costs per funding source is calculated. And finally, total program gross revenue and net on a DMH3 must equal the total program gross revenue and net on the DMH2. And again, that will come up when you hit save. It will say if they do not match, that this number is not matching and must be corrected. So that is the end of the claiming section. I'd like to now turn the presentation over to the host for some closing statements. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Paul. Just wanted to thank you guys once again for participating in the CFR training webinar for the 2021 fiscal year consolidated fiscal report. In case you missed the beginning of the webinar, we just have a few things we'd like to do before you log off. Please take time to fill out the post survey after you leave the event. It'll help us make these trainings better for you guys. Also, this webinar has been recorded and it will be posted shortly. It will be posted online shortly. An email is going to be sent out to everyone notifying you of where and when it'll be posted. The Q&As will be carefully reviewed and answered and will be posted online as soon as we can gather all the information. So I will actually leave the web event open so that you guys can submit all the questions you want. So I'll leave it open for about 5 minutes. So get all the questions in you can, and we'll try to post those answers online. I want to thank you guys again for joining, and we hope you found this training beneficial.